Some of the smartest money in Silicon Valley once looked at a juice machine and said, yes, this is the future. Kleiner Perkins, Google Ventures, Campbell Soup's venture arm, they all piled in, around $120 million total, and every single one of them got outsmarted by a pair of human hands. This is the entire story of how that happened, starting with the man who convinced them all, the Silicon Valley darling. Doug Evans was exactly the kind of founder that makes venture capitalists start sweating through their Patagonia vests. He'd already built and exited Organic Avenue, a chain of organic plant-based food retailers, giving him the perfect pedigree for a health tech startup. Proven founder, wellness vertical, recurring revenue model. The man checked every single hype box Silicon Valley had. He founded Juicero in 2013. Then basically disappeared for 3 years. The company operated in full stealth mode, quietly burning through 12 different prototypes before settling on a final design. 12. That's not product development, that's a personality trait, and the money followed. Juicero raised roughly $120 million across multiple rounds. Kleiner Perkins, Google Ventures, Thrive Capital, even Campbell Soup's venture arm got involved, because apparently a soup company looked at a juice machine and thought, yeah, that's our people. Here's the thing. Every single one of these investors bought the same pitch. This is the Keurig of juice, a machine that locks consumers into proprietary pods at premium prices, generating recurring subscription revenue forever. On paper, that model is a money printer. Keurig proved it. The problem is that Keurig's pods actually required a machine to function, but nobody was asking that question yet. Not when the founder had a track record and the revenue model promised infinite recurring income. So, $120 million went in, and everyone sat back waiting for the future of juice to arrive, which it did, at a price tag that made even Silicon Valley flinch. The $629 price tag. $700 for a juicer. Let that sink in for a second because it gets worse. When the Juicero press launched in March 2016, it debuted at $699, which is roughly what some people pay for rent in parts of this country. You could buy a perfectly functional cold press juicer for $300 to $500, and it would do the exact same thing. Actually, it would do more because those juicers let you use your own fruits and vegetables like a normal human being. But Juicero wasn't built for normal human beings. It was built for Silicon Valley professionals who saw $699 on a kitchen gadget and thought, yeah, that tracks. The machine was designed by Yves Bayard, a renowned industrial designer who'd worked with Jawbone and Herman Miller, because apparently your juice press needs a celebrity architect. The thing looked gorgeous on a countertop. It also cost more than most countertops. Here's where the real financial trap kicks in. The $699 was just the entry fee. Once you own the machine, you needed Juicero's proprietary juice packets to actually use it. Those ran $5 to $8 per serving and required refrigerated shipping directly to your door. So you're paying $700 for the privilege of then spending $7 every time you want a glass of juice. That's a subscription model designed to extract maximum money from the narrowest possible slice of wealthy consumers who would pay literally anything with the word organic on it. The machine also connected to Wi-Fi and came with a companion app. You could scan QR codes on the packets, check ingredient info, and reorder more juice, which sounds impressive until you remember the entire device exists to squeeze a bag. It's like putting Bluetooth in a doorstop, but if the price tag seems absurd, wait until you hear what they actually put inside this thing. Over-engineering the press. Let's talk about what was actually inside this thing, because it's genuinely unhinged. The Juicero press contained around 400 custom parts. 400. It had 10 printed circuit boards, multiple sensors, a microprocessor, and a Wi-Fi radio. It featured 8 machined metal parts, which sounds like nothing until you realize most kitchen appliances have 0. Your toaster has 0, your blender has 0. The Juicero had 8 because apparently squeezing a bag of kale required aerospace level precision. The machine applied approximately 4 tons of force to each juice packet. 4 tons. The company bragged this was enough force to lift 2 Teslas simultaneously, which is exactly the kind of comparison that only makes sense if you've been living inside a Silicon Valley pitch deck for 3 years straight. How much force does it need? Enough to lift 2 Teslas, but it's squeezing a bag of spinach. 2 Teslas. The door locking mechanism alone contained over 24 individual parts. Just the door, just the thing that holds the bag in place while the bag gets squeezed. They used expensive specialty plastics purely for aesthetics, because the juice apparently tastes better when the machine looks like it belongs in a museum. Here's the kicker. Each unit cost roughly $750 to manufacture. The retail price was $690. They were losing money on every single machine before paying a single employee, shipping a single packet, or keeping a single light on. And the wildest part? Nobody on the team apparently stopped to ask whether the pouches actually needed 4 tons of force in the first place. They just built the most over-engineered juice bag squeezer in human history and called it innovation, but all that engineering confidence was about to meet its worst nightmare: a pair of human hands and a Bloomberg camera crew. The Bloomberg Squeeze Test. On April 19, 2017, Bloomberg News did something that $120 million in venture capital could not survive. They squeezed a bag. That's it. That's the whole thing. Bloomberg journalists took a juicero produce packet, put it between their hands, and squeezed. Juice came out. They then ran the same packet through the juicero press. Juice came out. The results were virtually identical. In some cases, the hand-squeezed juice actually came out faster. No lab equipment, no experts, no fancy methodology, just 2 human hands and a bag of pre-cut vegetables, and suddenly a $400 machine had zero reason to exist. The video required absolutely no technical knowledge to understand. You didn't need an engineering degree. You didn't need to read a white paper. You watched someone squeeze a bag, juice came out, and your brain did the rest. That's why it went viral almost immediately. The simplicity was the devastation. 4 tons of pressing force, 10 printed circuit boards, 400 custom parts, a Wi-Fi radio, a microprocessor, all of it rendered completely pointless by a pair of hands that cost nothing. But here's the kicker. At least 2 juicero investors discovered the hand-squeezing capability on their own after they'd already purchased machines. Nobody from company leadership had ever mentioned it. One investor reportedly said they would never have taken the meeting if Evans were hawking bags of juice that didn't require high-priced hardware, which is, you know, not ideal when you've already cashed their check. The hand-squeezed juice showed no meaningful quality degradation. No nutrient difference, no loss in volume. The $400 machine and 2 free hands produced functionally the same product. In some tests, the hands actually won, extracting juice with less waste and faster completion times. 12 prototypes, 3 years of development, $120 million in funding, defeated by fingers, and the timing made everything worse. The Bloomberg article dropped just 13 months after Juicero's March 2016 launch. The company had 0 brand loyalty built up, 0 deep market penetration, 0 cushion of goodwill from a satisfied customer base that might have defended them. They were still a novelty, and now they were a punchline. But if you think the fallout was bad, wait until you hear how Juicero tried to talk their way out of this one. The PR damage control. The very next day, Juicero CEO Jeff Dunn did what any panicking executive would do. He wrote a Medium blog post, because nothing says we're totally fine like a 1,200-word essay published at maximum speed on a platform nobody's mom has ever heard of. Dunn's post attempted something genuinely impressive in its audacity. He tried to reframe the entire company overnight. Juicero wasn't a juice machine anymore. It was, and I'm quoting here, the first closed-loop food safety system. Yesterday you sold a juicer, today you sell food safety. Cool, that's not suspicious at all. Here's the argument. The Wi-Fi connectivity inside the press could scan QR codes on each packet, and if there was a food safety recall, Juicero could remotely disable contaminated packets before you drank them, which is technically true. But pivoting your entire brand identity from revolutionary cold-pressed juice experience to "we protect you from bad spinach in under 24 hours" is the corporate equivalent of a kid hiding a broken vase behind his back and saying he was actually just rearranging the furniture. Dunn also claimed that squeezing packets by hand would produce a mediocre and maybe very messy experience, which is a bold thing to say when the entire internet had just watched Bloomberg's video of someone calmly hand-squeezing a packet into a glass with 0 mess and identical results. That's not a rebuttal, that's just hoping nobody watched the video. To their credit, the company did offer full refunds to every customer who'd ever purchased a press. 30 days, no questions asked. A genuinely generous move that said, "we stand behind our product," while quietly whispering, "please don't all leave at once." And here's the fascinating part. Fewer than 5% of existing owners actually took the refund, meaning 95% of people who owned a machine just publicly exposed as unnecessary said, "No, I'm good." That's not brand loyalty. That's sunk cost psychology doing what it does best. Once you've spent $400 on a countertop juice robot, admitting it was pointless feels worse than just keeping it and never mentioning it at dinner parties again. But if you think the medium post and refund offer stabilize things, the next chapter proves exactly how wrong that assumption was. The price cut and refunds. Here's the thing about Juicero's pricing strategy after the Bloomberg disaster. It was basically the bargaining stage of grief, except instead of bargaining with God, they were bargaining with basic arithmetic. And losing. The company had actually already slashed the price from $699 to $399 back in January 2007, months before Bloomberg published their article. At the time, that felt like a meaningful concession, a $300 discount, progress. But once the world learned you could squeeze the packets by hand, that $399 price tag stopped looking like a deal and started looking like a $399 surcharge for owning a very heavy countertop decoration. So they went further. Juicero announced plans for a second-generation machine targeting roughly $200, one-third of the original price, which sounds like a bold pivot until you realize they were essentially admitting the first machine was overpriced by about $500. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. Then came July 2017. The company announced yet another round of price cuts alongside significant workforce reductions, laying off about 25% of their staff. Nothing says we're doing great quite like simultaneously making your product cheaper and firing the people who make it. At this point, the death spiral was visible from space. But here's the kicker. None of the price cuts mattered. Not a single one. The problem was never that the machine cost too much. The problem was that the machine was unnecessary. You could cut the price to $50, and it still wouldn't fix the fact that human hands existed and worked for free. Juicero wasn't competing with other juicers. They were competing with fingers, and fingers are complementary with every human body sold. The final act was almost poetic in its bleakness. In September 2017, the company announced that it would ship its very last produce packets to customers. They literally published their own expiration date, like putting a tombstone on a product that was still technically alive. Here lies Juicero's juice packets. They died doing what they loved, being squeezed by hands. But if you think the slow public humiliation of price cuts was bad, wait until you see what $120 million in as investor money actually bought. The financial collapse. Let's talk about the math, because the math is where this stops being funny and starts being genuinely upsetting. Each Juicero press cost approximately $750 to manufacture. The machine launched at $699. That means for every single unit Juicero sold at full price, they lost $51 before paying a single employee, shipping a single juice packet, or keeping the lights on in a single office. They were literally paying customers to take their product, which is, not ideal, but it gets so much worse. When they slashed the price to $399 in January 2017, that per unit loss ballooned to $351. Every sale was now a small financial catastrophe, and the proposed next generation machine at $200, that would have meant losing $550 on every unit that left the warehouse. At that point, you're not running a business. You're running a charity for people who want expensive juice they could make with their bare hands. Now layer on everything else. The proprietary juice packets required refrigerated shipping, meaning Juicero was paying for cold chain logistics to deliver bags of fruit pulp to people's doorsteps. That's not cheap. That's the kind of operational cost that makes accountants physically ill. All told, the company was burning through roughly $4 million per month in cash. $4 million every 30 days, with zero viable path to profitability at any price point they could realistically charge. And then the Bloomberg article hit in April 2017, and the follow-on investment dried up completely. By May, just weeks later, not a single venture firm would touch Juicero. The money spigot didn't slow down. It shut off overnight. No new funding rounds, no emergency bridge financing, nothing. The company had raised $120 million from some of the most prestigious investors in Silicon Valley, Google Ventures, Kleiner Perkins, names that are supposed to represent the absolute pinnacle of smart money. And by September 2017, roughly 18 months after launch, and just 5 months after Bloomberg published that video, Juicero ceased operations entirely. All $120 million gone. Zero return for investors. The entire sum evaporated into over-engineered hardware, refrigerated trucks, and juice. Nobody needed a machine to make. I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes the numbers speak for themselves, and what these numbers are saying is deeply, profoundly unkind. But the company may be dead, and the money may be gone. But the legacy of Juicero? That's forever. The legacy of the juice. Juicero shut down in September 2017, but it never really died. It just became something more useful than it ever was as a company. It became the joke. Say juicero in any startup pitch meeting, any venture capital boardroom, any tech podcast, and everyone knows exactly what you mean. It's shorthand. It's the one-word rebuttal to every over-engineered, overfunded, undervalidated product idea that walks through the door. $120 million, some of the most prestigious investors on the planet, 400 custom parts, 10 printed circuit boards, a Wi-Fi radio, and a microprocessor. All of it defeated by a pair of human hands squeezing a bag. That's not a failure. That's a monument. And the thing is, the lessons here aren't even complicated. They're embarrassingly simple. Juicero is a textbook example of every startup mistake happening simultaneously. They solved a problem that didn't exist. They over-engineered a solution nobody asked for. They skipped customer validation entirely. They raised $120 million before they had product market fit, and they let founder charisma do the heavy lifting where critical thinking should have been. Here's the one that genuinely hurts. There's a concept called a pre-mortem exercise, where before you build anything, you imagine the product has already failed, and you work backward to figure out why. One person in one meeting asking one question: what if customers just squeezed the pouches by hand, would have identified the fatal flaw before a single dollar went into manufacturing? That's it. That's all it would have taken. One question. Nobody asked it. The investor side is just as damning. Juicero gets compared to Theranos constantly, and the comparison is fair. Both companies raised absurd amounts of capital. Both had charismatic founders who convinced rooms full of sophisticated investors to write enormous checks. Both collapsed the moment someone actually tested whether the core product did what it claimed to do. The pattern is identical. Founder charisma plus investor herd mentality plus zero critical evaluation of fundamentals equals disaster every time. But the deeper problem was projection bias. The investors who funded Juicero were themselves affluent, health-conscious, tech-forward people living in coastal cities. They looked at a $700 internet-connected juicer and thought, yeah, I'd use that. And they assumed the rest of the market would too. They never validated that assumption. They just wrote checks based on their own preferences and called it due diligence. So what's Juicero's actual legacy? It's not juice. It never was. Juicero's greatest contribution to the world is being the perfect cautionary tale. It's the story you tell when someone wants to raise $50 million for a smart toaster. It's the example professors use in business school when they teach product validation. It's the punchline that will outlive every single person who invested in it. $120 million spent to prove that sometimes the best technology is just your hands. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.